Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Nerdrevolt number 54, Grappling with Gawker. I am your host, Brian Martinez, and I am joined by our panelists. We have, let me just really quickly run down who's here. Hannah's here. Hello, Hannah.
Hello.
Scott is here. Hello, Scott.
Hi.
Richard is here. Hello, Rich.
Hello.
And Allison is here.
Yep.
For the moment. And Cherry.
Hello.
Hello. And our special guest, Kraut and Tea. Well, Kraut.
Guten Abend.
All right. So before we get into the main topics,
Kraut, can you say that again?
Guten Abend.
Oh.
Before we get into the
Excuse me, I'll be my bug.
Before we get into the main topic, Allison wants to say a few things once she's gathered her senses together. Allison.
Yeah. Okay, well, first of all, I want to apologize for the craziness with the website. We've had some... It's been interesting times for the last month. First, it started off, we were getting our blog team volunteers. One person got a very suspicious phone call using his real name and dropping some names of our blog team members and informing him that he's in a political sweatshop and we are exploiting him as slave labor. And yeah, so after that, but on a positive note, the caller did say that he was quite cute. So, you know, great sort of sinister, creepy vibe going on there with the caller stalker. You're gonna say something, Brian?
No, I guess a compliment's a compliment wherever it comes from.
Wherever it comes from, you know, like creepy stalker is a compliment.
Take it wherever you can get it. That's
Take
what
it
I
where
say.
you can get it, right? So after that, we've had some other weird things going on, weird messages and shit. And remember we had a server issue when our server guy tried to update his new server. There was some sort of massive meltdown. So we haven't been up for 4 days. And believe me, that was a lot of fun to deal with. I want to do a shout out to thank somebody who stepped up in the last hour to put up a very, very, very simple temporary blog just to give people an idea what was going on, just so that they know we weren't wiped off the map by the powers that be. So I just want to thank RD for stepping in as our temporary server guy. And yeah, it's been a long, strange route. So once again, I apologize for the website being completely down. I'm now looking into a much more permanent solution, which will cost the big bucks, but hopefully it will result in us not having this happen again. But anyway, in addition, we are still doing a fundraiser to drag Karen out of her hole into South by Southwest. If you don't know what is important about South by Southwest, Open Gaming Society is doing a Gamergate-related panel at South by Southwest, which is pretty much, you know, it's pretty big because it's South by Southwest is a very, very big convention dealing with interactive media, music, games, and film. And so it's fairly mainstream, and the fact that we're having a panel there that is Gamergate related, I don't want to say it's Gamergate panel, but it is Gamergate related, is a pretty big thing. So we want to go and cover it so that it doesn't fall down the memory hole and get forgotten about. So there's sort of like a flag planted in South by Southwest that says, we were there. And no, there's no classified material on that server. So don't worry about that, anonymous commentator D. But yeah, this so it's important that we get Karen there, and Brian is also going to be there. So if you're in Austin on the 15th, the 14th through the 16th, you might be able to hook up with them in a non-biblical sense, of course. So yeah, and also so the fundraiser is at www.feedthebadger.com. It's Lights Camera Badger. Basically, the media thinks we're all haters, so let's show them different. Let's show them that we're not. So go there. Throw some shekels in the hat.
Let's build a wall of hugs.
Yes, well, hugs?
Yes, of hugs. Kill them with kindness.
A wall of hugs.
A wall of hugs.
Oh shit. Okay. All right. So apparently we've had a cat emergency on the Kraut end.
Yes, Kraut dealing with sudden cat poop, but that's okay. We'll start with
It's the Femluminati. They got to his cat.
yes. It's probably is it triangular shaped?
Well, you know they really like pussy.
So what we'll do is while he's dealing with suddenly poop, I will do the Hulk Hogan story. So yeah, we can just look at that, and it's pretty good stuff. Okay, just a moment here. Just get it queued up. Where is
Unexpected cat poop. It derails everything.
Yeah. All right. So first off, I want to thank Max Darrett for taking the time to write this up. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it because he is unable to speak. And so I will do it on his behalf. So, the time has finally come. The greatest gladiator match in the history of the internet. Santa with muscles versus hacks of journalism. Over the next 3 weeks, Hogan will be embroiled in a legal battle with Nick Denton's website, Gawker, the gossip site that published a part of his 30-minute sex tape back in 2012. Hogan, that's Hulk Hogan for those of you who don't know, is now suing Gawker for $100 million in damages for emotional distress and invasion of privacy. Ironically, Gawker's lawyers are looking to defend the media conglomerate by evoking the First Amendment. The Badgers are now going to analyze the arguments from both sides and determine the likelihood of Gawker's downfall. So, there was an article I saw that was on CNN, and they had interviewed...
Did we just lose a...
What happened?
What happened? Did anyone else? Did this happen to anyone else? Did Brian drop
Yeah,
out?
everything froze for a second.
Really?
Oh, really? Okay, we better restart.
Oh, okay. I'll just read it again.
It just was
No,
a,
don't
a
read it
second.
again. Just a second. Just maybe read the last sentence and then move on.
All right, I'll just read the end. All right, so I don't know how that happened. All right, so Hogan is now suing Gawker for $100 million in damages for emotional distress and invasion of privacy. Ironically, Gawker's lawyers are looking to defend the media conglomerate by evoking the First Amendment. The Badgers are now going to analyze the arguments from both sides and determine the likelihood of Gawker's downfall. So, can you guys still hear me? Are we good?
I think so. Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So, okay, so the thing I wanted to say is about this is I saw on CNN.com they did an interview with Nick Denton. And in it, Nick Denton was confident that there was no way that Hulk Hogan could win the case. And his reasoning was he was invoking the First Amendment, the freedom of the press, and he compared himself to Larry Flint. But the stakes are this. I mean, if Hogan wins this, Gawker will be done. Their $100 million is something that they just can't afford to lose. So the stakes are extremely high in terms of what Gawker is up against. So that's one thing I want to throw out there first. Has anyone been looking at this? So they did, I think, opening statements yesterday, and that's about as far as it's gone. Does anybody have any thoughts or words for what's going on with the case against Gawker? Anybody?
Yeah, well, I actually watched a little bit of it today, and it's like at this point it's much ado about nothing because it's a court case. When you're watching it, it's very boring. It's very bland. There's really nothing going on. It's not exciting. They're doing point counterpoint, asking questions, all this sort of stuff. So I think there's not much to talk about at this point, honestly. From what I saw today, they did a couple of basically interviews for about the hour and a half that I was watching it, and it was just kind of did you see this happen? Did you know this? It was a very typical kind of court thing. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that Denton's argument that this is freedom of the press and that this is what Gawker does and that Hogan doesn't have a case based on that, do you think that holds any water? Do you think that they actually have a case to defend against Hogan? And do you think Hogan has a case? I guess those are a couple of questions that I would put out there too. Something to think about.
No. It reminds me a lot about the phone hacking scandal in the United Kingdom, if you can remember that. When the press, what was it? The News of the World hacked the phones of a murder victim and of various other people's. And initially, when this entire scandal broke, they said, oh yes, this is freedom of the press, you know, we should be supposed to do this. But they very quickly just threw that argument out of the window when they noticed that it wouldn't really stick in a courtroom.
Yes.
Well, next thing you know, they're just going to, publish all of your, private info about your medical history, and it's basically, look at doxing. I mean, are they okay with doxing? I mean, what level does it go to?
Well, in our interviews with Nick Denton about other things.
And we lost Brian again.
Are we having fun yet?
Yeah, right.
I guess I can say one thing about this. The idea that freedom of the press simply allows the press to print anything without consequences is bullshit. And I think Gawker probably knows that. There have been instances in the past where media has been sued for defamation, for various things. And the one that comes to mind first, because I did do a little report on it in high school, most of which I don't remember, is Carol Burnett suing the National Enquirer because they published a story, and now it wasn't a video, it wasn't something that they had confirmation of or anything like that, and in fact what they published couldn't be confirmed because a lot of it was speculation on her behavior. But they published a description of behavior they were attributing to her after she had a dinner out with a group of friends, and they made a bunch of claims that turned out to be entirely false regarding, she did this, she said that, she was in this condition or in that condition, and so on. And they tried to claim freedom of the press because she's a famous person, basically a public personality, and therefore they're allowed to say anything they want about her. And what was decided basically in that case was if they say stuff that can be either disproved or that they can't prove is true, then she can sue them, and she can win, and she did. And they had to print a retraction, they had to pay her a bunch of money. So there is somewhat of a precedent for not being able to claim that just because somebody is famous, you can do and say anything you want regarding that person in the media. There's more than one. There's been numerous people that have sued tabloids, like the paper tabloids, for things that they've printed that were either not true or were defamatory and were not considered newsworthy. That's the other thing. The other question becomes whether or not this was actually newsworthy, because it wasn't really related directly to his career. The other person that he was with wasn't famous. This was really just taking a private moment and making it public for yucks. And I think they're going to have a hard fight doing this.
It is also the way by which they acquired this. I mean, they secretly filmed him essentially, and then decided to publish.
Although it wasn't, if I understand correctly, it wasn't Gawker that did the filming.
But anyway,
it was a secretly filmed moment.
They took it and then they published it, and then the struggle they put up when it went to court, and when they just published, I think it was some racist slur that he said, and they just published it because it went to court.
Right.
Yep.
Well, and one of the things too is like Gawker is trying to say that I think their opening statement was that the video is in the public interest, and that's why it should be categorized under freedom of the press. So I think they're kind of off to a shaky start just on that note themselves.
Yeah, the question as to whether that's in the public interest becomes, what benefit is it to the public to have been exposed to this?
Right.
What do we get out of it? Are we better off for knowing this? Have we got information now that's useful to us? Have we changed our entire opinion of Hulk Hogan because of this one moment in his life? Because I really haven't. I don't really think that. It's going to be an uphill battle, I think, for them arguing that this was in the public interest. I think the public wouldn't have given a rat's ass about not knowing this. I don't think the public would have voted for this to be, the general public would have voted for this to be aired. I think this is something that we all really don't care about. I'll bet more people talk about it than have watched it, and I'll bet more people have expressed disgust at it having been taken and published than have sought it out to see what it was.
What's the legal border on what is private information and what is public? Is there some sort of precedent about that? Because there's certainly documents and things of that nature that legally are not allowed to be divulged by some third party. So where exactly is that line?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's something that probably an attorney in this specific subject would have to tell you, and they might not even be right. I mean, obviously, your medical information, there's a law that protects your medical information from being released to the public, and there are certain other types of information, like if your bank releases your credit card number to the public, or if your credit card number is accidentally discovered by Gawker and they publish it, that would be a violation of your personal information. So there's obviously stuff that is limited, and that you can't just publish about people. But there isn't necessarily, so far as I know, there isn't a definite line that is the same for everybody. Like if, for instance, your neighbor down the street that nobody knows who they are, and that nobody's ever heard of them but the people that interact with them directly every day. If somebody had a tape like that with that neighbor and Gawker ran that, they wouldn't have a leg to stand on, if they sued.
It is more of a personal attack in that regard. If I were a journalist and I would get my hands on the documentation, the financial documentation of a company or some politician or something, and it would lead me to conclude that that person or that company was involved in some shady business, paying bribes or whatever, that still is in the public interest if I were to publish that information. But to just go after a private individual just on the basis of slandering that person, that is just, it's not really in public interest.
To make this of a public interest, he would have had to have been involved in, I don't know, the creating the curriculum for sex education courses, or lobbying for laws to prevent people from easy divorce, or lobbying to roll back laws that are court standards that don't apply fault in divorce settlements and things like that. He would have had to have been doing something that was directly related to it, and this is not a situation like that. This is not a situation where we're dealing with someone whose private sexual behavior was directly related to his interaction with the public. It's very shaky, really, claiming that this was in the public interest.
I think it's clearly not in the public interest. I think it only comes down to, just like we have laws, you can't trade in goods that are stolen. Just because you filmed the child pornography doesn't mean that you have the right to have it. And the same thing, if someone peeps in your window and takes a film, and then somebody oh, well, I didn't do the peeping into your window, somebody else filmed it. I don't think that is an excuse.
And what really interests me about this is, here we have a situation where a lot of people are arguing on Gawker's behalf. A lot of people are freedom of the press, right to the press, and all this other stuff related to Gawker. Where when it was the private pictures from actresses' cell phones that were released on 4chan, and and those were all over the deep web, there was all kinds of outrage for these women. Oh, those were private images. They had no intent for anybody to ever see those. This was a huge violation of privacy. Shame on the people that did this. It's an attack. It's a gendered attack. But as soon as it's a man, and instead of now it's okay to publish it just on the regular internet where everybody can see it, and they actually are being taken seriously, arguing in court that this is in the public interest. And I'm kind of curious, where are all the people who were so outraged when it was, when the fappening happened?
They need to just focus on the if they want to make this go through, they just need to focus on whatever woman he was with in it and her right in that way, and then he'll actually have a case. But otherwise, since it's just a guy, they're fine with it.
Yeah, that is another problem with the case. As soon as it's a guy whose privacy has been violated, everybody thinks it's much less of a big deal than it is when it's female.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't necessarily say that. We had something here about 3 years ago we had the Bavarian Libertarian Party, and a tabloid found out that he was some member of a BDSM club and did wife swapping, etc., and what else not. And the tabloid published it front page news, and the reaction, maybe it's a cultural difference, but the reaction by the public here was, why the fuck are you publishing this? This is his private life. It's none of our fucking business.
Well, there is a bit of a cultural difference here. There's a level of uptightness about sex in the United States that sort of adds to this. So on one hand, it's maybe a less dramatic reveal, but on the other hand, it may be a larger source of embarrassment, and there is a difference in attitude when it's a man being exposed and when it's a woman being exposed. Here you get blame thrown at the man more often, whereas the woman is considered a victim regardless of what she's exposed for. Even women here who have been exposed as it's not. I keep getting corrected. It's not pedophilia when you're dealing with teenagers, but women who get exposed as whatever it is when you are with your teenage students, they're getting treated as victims as well more frequently than they are getting treated as perpetrators in media. And it's only been fairly recent that we've seen a lot of prosecution and that we've seen people actually coming down on them for it. So it actually, there's a pretty stark difference between the way men and women are treated when it comes to even when they do something wrong, much less when they haven't done anything wrong.
Especially when it comes to politicians, in particular male politicians, like we had the Anthony Weiner scandal, and everybody's just giddily pointing fingers at any male who's exposed, but a woman is like a huge breach of public trust. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, that was, and it pretty much wrecked his career. And now that was something that I noted when we initially talked about Bill Cosby too. If you go back through sort of the history of sex scandals in politics, you go back and look at the Bill Clinton scandal. When that happened, one of the first things that the Clinton camp kind of did was come out and point fingers at every Republican who was engaged in scandalous behavior. So, and it worked to an extent. It still didn't protect Clinton, but it did shame quite a number of Republican men. But nobody pointed any fingers at any of the females. It was all this man is gay, this man is cheating on his wife, this man has been caught with somebody who's almost a minor, this man has been in trouble for sexual harassment, but they didn't investigate any of the female Republicans or any of the female Democrats.
Concerning,
I think we should remember one thing really quickly here before we get too far along, is that the greatest tag team in history is Gamergate and Hulk Hogan, and we're potentially going to take down Gawker. So I just want to remind everybody of that. So yeah, just to bring it down a minute.
It will go down like it did with the phone hacking scandal in the UK. I'm pretty sure of it. And it will be very delicious to watch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, didn't Murdoch's daughter and son both get charged in that thing too?
No, they had to talk at a parliamentary inquest. The thing about the phone hacking scandal was that they hacked the phones of celebrities mainly.
Right.
And they built criminal cases and civil cases around it, but generally nobody in the public gave a shit because, well, it's just celebrities. But then they hacked the zone of murder victim and broke the investigation. I think they interfered within the police investigation because they deleted messages on the phone of the murder victim, which was, I believe, a 15-year-old girl or something, which led the police to believe, and the parents to believe, that she might still be alive when in fact she had been dead for several weeks. And when that news broke, well, things went pretty downhill. And at first, within the first few weeks, you could see that many of these tabloid journalists were claiming, well, this is for free speech, we are doing the right thing here. But as soon as the public opinion swayed against them, you could see them crashing. And it was such a delicious thing to watch, you know, all these... What's the name of that idiot who went to the United States and worked for CNN? Who, that slimy cunt. What's his name?
Piers Morgan?
Yes, exactly. When he was dragged before the parliamentary inquest and had to give his testimony, and all these other idiots just squeaming in front of the parliamentary inquest. And it was a really delicious thing to watch, and I believe the same thing will be happening here, that all these rats and weasels who work for Gawker, they all, in the end, they will crack. I believe they will scream and just give up everything they have as long as they can get away.
Looks like Brian is trying to speak, but is muted.
Brian, are you muted, or are you trying to get back in? I think you're muted.
I was muted, but I'm back now. I just got my internet. Yeah, can you guys hear me? I just got my internet rectified thanks to this really helpful person I was on the phone with. So I think I'm good. I apologize for what was going on before. But I'm back, and I think I sound okay. Do I sound okay?
Brian,
yes, you sound good.
Okay, good. Excellent. So, are you guys? Are we going to move on to the next topic? Or are we still talking about Hogan? That's the only thing I wanted to know. Does anyone else have any thoughts about the Hogan case?
Hulkamania is going to run wild on it, baby.
Yeah, that's right. Well, why don't we go into the next topic, the Wikipedia one? So, I know that Kraut and Hannah were very involved with this. Hannah, why don't you open it up with your little write-up, and then Kraut, you can add on to it.
This is the details, the bigger details.
Yeah, then we'll look at the details and really take this apart. Guys that are listening, this could be humongous, so it's really important to pay attention. All right, go ahead, Hannah.
All right. In a message to Kraut and Tea after he began his research for his article and videos about their endeavor, a representative of Art Plus Feminism wrote to him that no bias is included in the edit-a-thon's goals. They claim that articles added to the event or during the event will be free of ideological leaning, and they cite Wikipedia's editing and oversight process as insurance against stray partisanship. Now, what I'm talking about here is we recently covered an edit-a-thon that I believe took place on the 6th of this month, which was organized by Art Plus Feminism under the guise of of basically countering what they consider to be the sexism of excluding women from Wikipedia editing, and therefore women not being noted on Wikipedia. They're assuming that just because because there are mostly male editors, that will cause women to be excluded from different topics on Wikipedia, that they won't write about notable women. And going on, Wikipedia's claim to neutrality relies heavily on the assumption that well-intentioned editors will outnumber these ulterior motives, and that an editor's most prominent good intention will involve neutrality rather than spreading an ideology he or she considers benevolent. The site's history contradicts that, showing that its editing process is quite vulnerable to the very issues we're being promised Art Plus Feminism won't have. Rules governing editing oversight relies on the use of fallacious logic in vetting sources. And settling of editing disputes is handled by consensus, or failing that, arbitration by higher-ranking editors. Both avenues are pathways for ideological cliques among the site's editors to exclude information which contradicts their own viewpoint. This has led to inaccuracies and omissions on the site in numerous instances, and as Timothy Messer-Cruz noted in his article, The Undue Weight of Truth on Wikipedia, Wikipedia's oversight system can make errors difficult, if not impossible, to correct. Can we really trust that an ideological group's mass editing initiative won't exploit the site's vulnerability to bias, given the hurdles faced by anyone attempting to correct mistakes in its articles?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Kraut, what have you found?
Well, I'm opening the thing right here. Okay, there have been several of these edit-a-thons throughout the last 3 years. There have been more than one women in art. There has been women in history, women in music, women in religion, women in science, women in tech, women in architecture, women in jazz, black women's history, 2 or 3 Black Lives Matter edit-a-thons, women of African diaspora edit-a-thon, and we also found that they hosted events in which they taught people how to edit Wikipedia. So they host events before each of these events, teaching people how to edit Wikipedia articles. And these are organized in universities throughout the United States and apparently also around the world. And yeah, essentially creating an army of editors to then edit or add new Wikipedia articles. And what was interesting was we found how most of this was centered around New York City. More precisely, I forget the fucking name all the time. Metro, the the New York City Library Council. And we found that this one person called, there were several activists involved in the organization process of these events, but one person stood out, which was Dorothy Howard, and she apparently was a Wikipedian in residence, meaning a higher ranking member in Wikipedia. And she is partner, she worked for the New York Library, and she set up the edit-a-thon organization structure in New York City. So she is the one who managed this entire, how do I put the right word? She managed the, she created it essentially and managed it from then on. And her views are rather disturbing. First, she complete snowflake. That's something that you can see from her profile, which is hexatekin on Wikipedia, and her grants for example, she proposed on Wikipedia are community discussions on harassment, in which includes things such as silencing, like not all men, or condensation such as splaying, slut shaming, sexualized harassment, and toxic masculinity. And if you go further through her Tumblr, you find her views, for example, include things such as I'm not going to read this entire shit because it's mainly self-righteous gibberish, but essentially she believes that free speech causes oppression, some weird cultural Marxist theory. And this woman has been organizing edit-a-thons throughout the last 3 years on Wikipedia, training people how to edit Wikipedia articles. And to be more specific, since I already read the names of these edit-a-thons, women in history, women in music, Black Lives Matter, they all have activist backgrounds. They all have activist intentions. There's always a political incentive behind all of these events. And it is amazing how this has been going on for 3 years with seemingly nobody noticing it, or at least us not noticing it.
Yeah.
Well, I will say there was some notice of it. There's been discussion about ideological bias and editing bias on Wikipedia for a few years, but I don't think everybody's put all the different pieces together behind the organization of it. There was discussion of it in the men's rights subreddit for the last few years because of attacks on articles related to men's rights, men's issues. And then there was a great deal of discussion about it involving Gamergate, because there was a great deal of bias edited into the article on Gamergate, which of course had to be labeled a Gamergate controversy because Gamergate is a type of ant. But and then there was also discussion of bias related to the editing of Christina Hoff Sommers' article on Wikipedia.
The thing is about the safe policy. That's something I forgot to mention. When I looked at her profile, she visited the Wikipedia conference in Washington, and it seems that the conference in Washington, the Wikipedia conference, had a safe space policy. And from the things that she proposes, from her profile, the discussion she engages in, there seems to be a serious effort. I'm not just speaking about the edit-a-thons. There seems to be an effort to implement some weird harassment and safe space policies on Wikipedia itself upon the editors of the site.
Yeah, and there's also some money involved as well. This actually is more organized between social justice warriors and Wikipedia rather than a simple invasion.
So you're saying that, like, Wikipedia itself, there are some higher ups in Wikipedia that are, you know, giving this some sort of blessing?
Well, she received grants, which are, as far as I know, if you donate money to Wikipedia, that goes into a pot, and that pot of money is then delivered to various people in the form of grants, which means she received money to organize this, possibly. She organized this with the Library Council of New York, and she seems to have received a grant to go to the Netherlands to visit the Royal Library in Rotterdam, possibly to visit a Wikipedia conference in Berlin, and it seems like she also received money to set up this discussion board or proposal board for stricter harassment rules covering the various Wikipedians and editors.
Well, it seems like there's a pretty straightforward method of kind of attacking this problem, and that is, somebody had mentioned that she seems like she's specifically against free speech, and I think free speech is something that everyone can sort of gather around as an agreed upon thing. And like one of the things that I've had happen in editing Wikipedia, I edited some technical articles for a while, but then when I was to add information that was simply historical information, but because it shed poor light on what was the dogma that I was actually trying to show some alternative viewpoint for, it was immediately squelched. In other words, they want to remove the information, and that's one of the biggest problems is when they want to remove the information and limit the ability to add the information. And so one of the first things that is kind of a problem with the whole idea of just gaining knowledge in general is the idea is consensus truth actually truth? And I think that anybody who looks at the prevalence of religion could say that, okay, well, not just just the number of people who believe in X religion doesn't necessarily mean that is the truth. So the idea that consensus equals truth is kind of a deep problem with the way in which humans kind of divine what the truth is. So if we could somehow attack specifically from that angle, say free speech and the idea that consensus truth is not necessarily truth, therefore you need to have a section and perhaps at least delineate to keep them from squelching. So delineate, okay, sure, you can say this is the consensus idea so long as you allow areas which are marked as non-consensus to also be added to it. But I guess it's kind of a thing with limiting the size of the articles, etc. Because of course, there's going to be people who think that alien rabbits are infesting our noses or something and put that on there as well. But I don't know. I think that's kind of a point of attack to try to fix the problem.
And that's one of the big problems with Wikipedia's oversight, because not only do they operate on this idea that consensus is truth, but then when you have a dispute between editors over which thing is correct to put in the article and which thing should not be in there, then they rely on another consensus to decide which one of them has sources that are valid and which one of them hasn't got sources that are valid for what they're saying. And it's basically it's all based on the ad populum fallacy, the belief that if a lot of people agree on something, it's the right thing. And it's very frustrating to see this happening with something that presents itself as reference material, because what it's basically allowing for is any common misconception to be presented as fact. And one of the best examples of that is, like I mentioned in the original post there, Timothy Messer-Cruz had written this article, "The Undue Weight of Truth," on Wikipedia. Now, undue weight is the name of their ad populum policy. And what it basically boils down to is, if you can label information that somebody's trying to add to Wikipedia a belief rather than confirmed fact, then you determine its value based on how many people believe in it. And what he was dealing with was a bit of information related to the Chicago Haymarket riot and trial of 1886, where it was commonly believed and had been commonly reported that the court had no evidence against the defendants in that case. Then there was this trial that went on, and it went on for weeks and weeks. And one of his students had asked him in class, well, if this trial went on for weeks and weeks, what did they talk about if they didn't have any evidence? And of course, he went back and he'd written books about this. He'd researched this, and he had the evidence. He went back and he looked through everything. Oh, well, they did have evidence against the defendants in the case, and so he went to the Wikipedia article that information was in and corrected the information. And he ended up in an edit war with an editor who was basically butthurt over having his article changed. And it really, they stymied him with this consensus policy where he couldn't get the article edited, and he really couldn't get any satisfaction from arbitration, and they really didn't correct the misinformation in the article until after the article, the undue weight article, was published on Chronicle.com. And then later on, BGSU, their publication, had another article about it where he talked about his ordeal and everything. But it becomes very difficult to correct misinformation on a site like that if you have entrenched editors that have been there before you, and you're a newer editor, and you have information that they don't like and they don't want to include. Even if that information has a valid source, even if that information is 100% confirmed fact, you can get overridden by other editors who have more tenure than you. And even if it's just you against one other editor, the minute they start asking for arbitration for higher ranking editors who are higher ranking because they have more tenure and they're more popular, you can still get
it's about
this,
clicks.
you can still get this, club, this cliquish, clubbish.
There's one thing I wanted to add, and that is that I went to a site of people who essentially it's a forum more or less. We exist to shine the light of scrutiny into the dark crevices of Wikipedia and its related projects to examine the corruption there, along with the structural flaws. And I asked around a bit if they could tell me a bit about biases and about the editing process. And one post that I found particularly interesting that was given to me as a reply was, battles over the appropriateness of a source for use in Wikipedia have always been settled through collateral attacks, such as accusing your opponent of incivility or other violations of the rules. This is largely because Wikipedia has no mechanism at all for authoritatively deciding disputes over content, but does have mechanisms to settle disputes over conduct, which causes disputes over content to be transformed into disputes over conduct. Which I found particularly interesting because when you consider, for example, if most of the people that we have encountered via Gamergate or other ways, other areas in which feminism kind of infested itself, it has always been over conduct, hasn't it? It has always been over harassment policies and things like these.
Yeah, that's one of the things that happens. Is it's a sociology of scientific knowledge is a study that not a lot of people look closely at, but they're our knowledge base and how it ends up being brought more to a head. A lot of times ends up being through these social mechanics that really don't have any bearing on the truth or fact finding. They have to do with just little social mechanics.
And
this has been a problem the entire time, and if it gets it already has somewhat of a hold on Wikipedia. It already makes it darn near impossible to remove misinformation and deliberate disinformation, and it makes it hard to add information that doesn't fit somebody's narrative. But because this is being used consistently by social justice warriors in other formats, and because there's already an inroad for it into Wikipedia, if they get this foothold and they anchor this foothold, Wikipedia will become nothing but a propaganda machine.
Brian asked previously, because of the Christina Hoff Sommers article, we noticed when we looked into this, we went to the site of the Wiki project Feminism, which is on Wikipedia. Various people form their own groups, and there is a Wiki project Feminism, and we noticed that within a period of 2 days or something, the Christina Hoff Summer article had been edited 90 times or something like that. We made the common mistake of assuming that these are edits only made by the feminist group. Apparently these are overall edits, which means that they could be made by all sorts of people. But the fact that it is listed there as a hot article, this list is generated automatically by a hot article bot. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, it kind of shows that they might have some interest into editing articles that might not be confirmed to their worldview.
Well, and a lot of edits to an article like that can also signify kind of a quiet edit war, although generally speaking that's discouraged, but it could entail somebody taking out somebody else's edit and then the other person putting it back and them arguing back and forth over why that edit should be there or why it should not be there. And actually, her article has an example of what I was talking about earlier with this due and undue weight measure. It is considered a more credible source on what Christina Hoff Sommers believes if somebody quotes an editorial about her than if somebody quotes the woman herself. That is actually an argument that is made in a discussion on whether or not to include her self-identification as a feminist in her article. They're actually citing that policy and as to whether or not her statement, "I am a feminist," and that's like the only time you'll ever hear me say that, her statement of being a feminist on Twitter, that she stated it, that's not credible enough to counter some editorial writer calling her an anti-feminist in their article because they don't like the way that she criticizes feminism. That's how Wikipedia works right now.
I don't understand why they. I guess sometimes you need like a simple plan to fix something, and I think Wikipedia is a invaluable source of information. I don't think anybody can really argue that there isn't a tremendous amount of value to Wikipedia, and so I think that we really need to work towards fixing what seems to be a really, really difficult problem, and it seems as though, it seems like they should be really easily persuaded to have the idea of an oppositional section to articles, because it when it comes to, we've got this kind of two-party politics. It seems like it's it would come naturally. I know it's kind of a crude solution, but it seems like it would at least be a starting point if it was something that people who have a problem with Wikipedia could then start to push this. It's like, no, you need to allow for an opposition section so that all of these counter issues, all these counter things, can then allow the people who are part of the opposition, allow them to alter that section of the the article.
Well, the problem with that, though, is the thing that I've noticed anyway, and this is, purely anecdotal, but is that you have a system whereby the people that are in power there are already entrenched, and they already have set up this it's kind of a dictatorship, quite frankly. Again, from what I've seen anyway, that these people have got their comfortable positions. They're in their little powerful places, and there's not really anybody that can step in and say, hey, you know what, I disagree with you. We should change this, because they get overruled because they've got tenure or seniority or whatever you want to call it. So I think the system is flawed as it is, and trying to fix it is kind of like Hannah said, it's kind of turned into a propaganda machine at this point. And
it's also kind of what the Russians did in the Second World War, just built thousands of tanks, whilst the Germans only had a few thousand, because it's quantity over quality.
Right.
In these edit-a-thons you have, I don't know how many people engaging. I don't know how many people. The thing is, when we looked through this, we noticed that in one of these edit-a-thons or something like that, they made, we found a number of 2,100 articles, and we thought, oh, so they made 2,100 articles over these times. No, they made 2,100 articles over one single month. And if this has been going on for 3 years, who knows how many articles they've been editing? I mean, who else is organizing groups to edit Wikipedia? Who else is doing that? I mean, when a Chinese or Russian government server is found to have edited a Wikipedia article, it kind of becomes news. But the precedent that this here sets, when everyone can simply set up a activist group to edit Wikipedia, it's first off, it's quantity over quality, and second off, who is going to prevent a political campaign, a corporation or a government or who knows who, from setting up a Wikipedia task force to essentially spam Wikipedia with.
Well,
that's already
we saw that with Gamergate.
That's already occurred. There have already been, and they've been caught. And
we've seen that with Gamergate too.
They were doing it, when they were doing it, that was a big bad thing. That actually got heavily criticized, and there were actions taken. There were a lot of Wikipedia editors that were banned, and there were all kinds of disciplinary actions taken over this, and the articles were reverted, and so on. This was done by political campaigns. This was done by like IBM was one of the companies that like they edited out stuff that they had done during World War II. So there was all kinds of stuff like that happened. Now. One of the problems with the software that is used for that, if I remember correctly, and this is in my article on the topic, that there's two ways that you can edit on Wikipedia. You can actually have an account and officially be an editor, or you can identify yourself just based on your IP address, and it doesn't filter out one of those two ways. And I cannot remember whether it was just the IP addresses that didn't get filtered out, or whether it only filtered out actual editors. But so there's a loophole for that particular software that's supposed to find these new edits and correct them and everything. And the same can be true with these new efforts, these edit-a-thons. That if that loophole is still in existence, they can simply use it and exploit it and not get caught. The other thing is, if the existing editors are sympathetic to the ideology that's behind the editing, they're more likely to let it slide. They're more likely to accept arguments on, well, these sources are valid, and some of the articles on Wikipedia can be very slippery. Like if somebody were to put up an article on Wikipedia about I don't know, a particular basketball player from a particular university who had done something that they felt was notable and became well known in an area, a large area or something. It could be argued by other Wikipedians that person was not notable enough to deserve a Wikipedia article, and that article might be taken down. The same type of argument was used a few years ago, repeatedly actually, by feminist Wikipedians to remove an article on violence against men, even though Wikipedia has an article on violence against women. And the article on violence against men included things like statistics on domestic violence against men, which these Wikipedian feminists argued wasn't real gendered violence because men are not oppressed, and wasn't real gendered violence because female violence is self-defense. All of the feminist arguments were used. They didn't consider circumcision to be gendered violence. And here we have, basically ideological arguments being used to decide whether or not something is notable or something is a separate issue from an existing topic. They might decide somebody's not notable based on their ideology, not considering the person's contributions to the world valuable. And so, at the same time, we've got these people deciding that being female makes somebody notable enough to get included in a Wikipedia article, and they're editing to add a lot of women from history, whether or not they were the first to have done something, whether or not they did create a new innovation, whether or not they came up with a new style, whether or not they significantly contributed to an art movement. Because they're women, they shouldn't be excluded. Therefore, we have to add them. Even if they didn't do anything special.
Well, and that's the kind of the crux of the problem, though, isn't it, Hannah? Is that there is no governing body over this kind of thing. It's like, it seems like the governing body is people's feelings at this point. At least that's what I'm seeing anyway. At least that's what I'm extrapolating from all the information. It's like there's no mandate of truth involved in this. It's just like, well, this is what I think, or this is what I feel, and the system has obviously been abused. I mean, we've seen it with Gamergate, where people have gone in and changed the Wikipedia articles to state obviously spurious information. It's just factually, verifiably incorrect information is being put out, and we can only imagine that if they're doing it on something as small as Gamergate, what else is happening where they're doing this kind of thing? So I mean, this is just there doesn't seem to be any kind of accountability within the system, and the system is obviously rife with corruption. So how does it get fixed then? I guess is the next question I have.
It is a power vacuum, and just like with every power vacuum, those who are the worst zealots, of course, to take over. Those who are the most determined, of course, take over. And it depends far too much on the goodwill of the people who are involved or people who intend to get involved.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about a problem that's, it applies to more than just Wikipedia. This is a kind of a ubiquitous problem in any kind of collection of knowledge. You eventually have some dogmatic group that takes control, and they alter the way in which our history, the way in which we keep up with any set of knowledge. And so, this is, I think, whereas we've said, oh, it looks like it's kind of turning into a propaganda machine. Well, that's true of history. That's true of a variety of things. So, fixing this problem with Wikipedia, it's really a long-standing and much broader problem in general, because there's always going to be these ideological groups that are screwing with our base sets of knowledge, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, you see that in textbooks, in elementary and middle school, high school textbooks, even university textbooks. The people who decide what is going to go in those textbooks, people who decide which textbooks are going to be used, and so on. As soon as you let somebody who you don't have any oversight regarding whether or not they insert their ideology in, you get an entirely different look at history, you get an entirely different look at politics, you can get an entirely different look at science, especially now with the global warming debate. As regimes change in government, you can flip back and forth between numbers of years of kids that learn one thing about it and numbers of years of kids that learn something entirely different about it. And nobody's going to get the actual facts. Everybody's only going to get what the political party in charge at the time that the textbooks they ended up using were created and sent to the schools. They're going to get that political party's perspective instead of anything that is actually, scientific and rational, or anything that is historically factual. They won't get the full story on anything. And this is, partly why kids from the United States, for instance, think of Christopher Columbus as strictly a hero, and it takes growing up and getting out of elementary school before they actually learn anything about what really happened with him. It's why nobody learns the true Thanksgiving story in elementary or junior high school or even high school. Why we go through and half the kids that you grew up with have no idea the real reasons behind things like the Civil War or the Great Depression or any of the great events in history. And the only way to solve something like that is, instead of just taking kids through the school system and sending them home with their little heads stuffed with information, you teach them critical thinking. You teach them to read for content, and you teach them to be able to seek out that information for themselves, assess it for themselves, rationally, and actually make their own decisions on it. And you go ahead and teach them the basic facts. Go ahead and teach them basic math. Go ahead and teach them even the higher maths, but don't indoctrinate them, because the next group that comes in behind you is going to indoctrinate the next group of kids entirely differently, and nobody's ever going to win. The same is true with Wikipedia.
Good luck with that one, Hannah. Good luck with that.
The same is true with Wikipedia, but it needs to be handled slightly differently. We're the administration. We just don't acknowledge it. And the reason that we're the administration is Wikipedia asks for money every year. Now, I'm not giving them money. And when I don't give them money, I'm not just going to tell them I'm not giving them money. I'm going to tell them I'm not giving them money because they suck. And I'm going to tell them why they suck. And I do that every year. And every year they send me a letter full of excuses as to why they're allowed to suck the way they suck, and I should just take it. But if I'm the only one doing that, then they're not really going to feel like they have to do any better than that. If hundreds of people send them letters saying, I'm not sending you money because you suck, and this is why, they might have to pay attention.
Yeah, you hit upon something really important with the teaching children critical thinking, and I would say also specifically the idea of mechanics and logic in general. I don't know that there's really any deep classes for logic, and I think that that's something that used to be in schools, but you don't really see that as a subject in general anymore. And and now we actually have some feminist pundits, I guess, talking about logic being, something bad. I don't know. It's just it's unfathomable.
Somebody asked which group I'm talking about not sending money to. I'm talking about not sending money to Wikipedia, but don't just not send them money. Tell them, And my way of doing it is I report a problem with donating, because they don't really have a contact us for that. But if you report a problem with donating, that gives you a contact that you can send a note to. My problem with donating is you suck. You don't have to say it like that. I don't say it quite like that. I'm a little more articulate when I write my email to them, but it still makes the point, and I think it's a point that needs to be made over and over again. But no, you're definitely right. They don't teach critical thinking in school, and they haven't for years. But I think I don't think they even really teach the scientific method to elementary kids anymore. I remember learning it in elementary school, and this is stuff that an elementary school kid can handle. A lot of this stuff, an elementary school kid can handle. What the ad populum fallacy is. That's really, just because everybody believes something doesn't mean it's true. Is easy to explain to a 5-year-old. You can explain to a 5-year-old that calling Johnny a poopy duty head does not destroy his argument. You can explain that stuff to a 5-year-old, and they can understand it. And even a preschooler can understand some of that stuff. So there's no excuse to not teach this stuff to kids. The only reason to not teach it to kids is to make it easier to stuff their heads with your ideology.
Well, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I think that I may drop because my speed is abysmal.
Again.
And fucking Comcast is responsible. Yeah, they fixed it and then it dropped down as soon as it snake oil shit. But anyway, that's not important. I would like to. I think that we've run through the topic pretty well, right? And I think that we should wrap it up. So I want to thank everyone for joining me on this panel. Thank you, Hannah and Kraut, especially for doing all of that homework related to the Wikipedia stuff. I think that this is a big deal. I don't know if you guys have said this because I was on the phone with Comcast off and on, but when people are trying to learn something, when they're looking for information on the internet, Wikipedia is almost always where 90% of people go. And it should be, because it is something that is supposed to have been sort of a crowd-contributed, project. It should be reasonably reliable if so many people are going to use it, because you will list the sources and you can go to the sources and all that. But these people appear to they have an interest in controlling information, and it's Orwellian. I mean, this is not a joke. This is not. I know that like there are people who say that the whole 1984 thing is a cliche that gets tossed around often, kind of like Hitler. But this is actually what is happening. People are rewriting things, and they're changing the information. There are people involved that have an ideological bent to what they're doing, and that's not okay. The ideas of our facts and our knowledge and the way things went down, these are not subjective. These generally are objective to the degree that we can that we have them recorded or that we can trace them back. And then the stuff that isn't so clear-cut, well, the arguments should all be laid out so that people who want to go to Wikipedia and find out for themselves can do so. They can look at everything that there is and make up their own mind. But I'm of the opinion that the people who are doing this don't have an interest in creating this more what you would call an argumentative approach to figuring out the truth, or trying to see what truths there are, so that they can determine their own, have essentially all sides of the argument laid out for them. So, is it possible that this is overblown? Maybe, but I'm not of the opinion that it is the case. I think that you ignore something, and then it goes, it basically starts running roughshod. Bad information leads to very bad ideas, and we've seen this ourselves. People might say Wikipedia is a bad source. It doesn't matter. Everyone uses it. So let's try to make it a better source. Let's challenge it to be better, because that's where everyone goes. So, that's just how I see it. Make sure everyone knows. So, reality says it's underblown. I agree. This needs to be bigger than it is. And when you couple the fact that Wikipedia is being changed with all the stuff that we did last week about social media, there are groups of people that are trying their damnedest to silence dissent of opinions and views that they don't have an interest in hearing. And I think that that's a very serious issue. So, but anyway, I want to thank Kraut and Hannah a lot for doing all the work to put all this out there. And we're going to try and keep an eye on anything else that develops, anything else we might learn. For those of you guys who are watching, maybe some of you are Wikipedia editors. Maybe you have some insight that we don't have. Maybe you knew about this for a long time, and you see that there's something else that's on the horizon. Maybe you think that this is all bullshit. Just share your comments and your thoughts in the comments section. Let's talk about it. Let's be open and honest about it. Let's try to find out what's happening. Let's get to the bottom of all of this stuff. Let's spread it. Share the video. Go to Kraut's channel. He has a few videos up there. Go to our blog. We've written a few. We have a few written pieces up there. Check all that stuff out.
Actually, they're making hashtags in the chat. I put hashtag Wikigate at the start of my article on this. Use hashtag Wikigate. It's short enough and convenient enough that people remember it. If you're gonna tweet about it to that.
Yeah, if you're gonna tweet about it, do that. Let's do it for as long as Twitter will allow us to do it. Kraut?
And go to the blog. Don't watch the videos. My videos on the subject are less detailed. The blog is more detailed if you want more information about the subject.
That's true, but Kraut has good videos though. Just go to his channel. His response videos are good. Sorry, I'm gonna shill your channel. Is that okay if I pimp it out?
No problem.
Yeah, Kraut and Tea. Subscribe to him, and definitely go to the Honey Badger blog. It's at Hannah. Where's the blog precisely? Do you know the link? Hannah, are you fighting with the mute button?
Yes, I am. It looks like it's still honeybadgerbrigade.com is still the link for the blog. So we're still up under that name.
Okay.
And if you just go to that right now, at this moment, it's the first 2 articles on the blog. So, and I don't have anything scheduled to publish from us at all tomorrow right now. So these should be up for at least a day as the first couple, but you'll be able to find them for a while without having to search very far.
Yeah.
Trying to post a link. No, it doesn't work. Bloody hell.
We'll put it in the low bar as well. But yeah, just go to honeybadgerbrigade.com. And I want to thank Richard for coming and sharing his experience on Wikipedia also. Thank you. And Anna for just being Anna and being here with us. And as always, Scott, my co-host. Yeah. And Allison for shining a little bit of light at the beginning with her commentary. So, and those of you guys who are watching, you are the reason why we keep doing what we're doing, and we are hoping that this gets out. So please leave your comments about the Wikipedia story as well as Hulk Hogan versus Gawker. What are Hogan's chances if he wins? Is he going to bury that company for good? What does that mean for Gawker if that happens? And yeah, just do that. So with that said, I am Brian Martinez with Honey Badger Radio and the Nerdrevolt, and we will talk to you guys next time. Feed the Badger, feedthebadger.com, patreon.com/honeybadgerradio, and as always, topic@badgerpod.com. We will see you next time.